Hello all, welcome to study 16 of the Solving Studies to Improve Chess Calculation. It's time to present you a study from the famous J.Timman. J.Timman, a Dutch chess grandmaster, if you don't know him. I recommend you to read something about him. It's an impressive chess player. He was very strong in his peak. He reached, I think, number two in the world, and he was the best non-Soviet player, and he was nicknamed the best of the West. So it's Jan Tima. Uh, uh, I can say also that he loves studies and chess and games. And if I'm not mistaken, because I don't have the magazine nowadays, the new in chess, I was a subscriber, but then stopped the subscription. Still sorry about that. Jan Timman, I think it's a lead editor there, and he wrote a column about most of the times about this kind of studies. Also present studies from Gukesh that start doing also them very young. So he also is a promoter of this kind of chess, this kind of chess. Okay, so let's go for the position. This is a hard one. It's incredible how he came up with this one. In my opinion, it's a position to take time. Again, the hard part is to find defensive moves. Nevertheless, I think it justifies to, if needed, to use more time than the 10 minutes of the countdown. You know the drill. If you haven't read the guide or watched the guide, of course, and see you after the countdown. All right, time to the solution, and I hope you have found it. The only possible move for white to keep the draw is play rook c5. But let's first look at the position with better eyes. Of course, we have our rook attacked, so we need to do something about it. And behind the rook, there's a bishop, and with the perspective of having to face rook d2 check and then losing the bishop in a without any exchange. Well, it's not a good thing for white. But let's see, for example, simple moves like attacking the rook isn't, of course, not enough because we are going to lose two pieces just for one, ended up with two bishops against the king, which is a win. By now, you should know that. And we can try more things like trying to attack the two bishops and seeing, okay, I will at least win one, yeah, but then we have to face this uncomfortable move that we can't get away, pinning the rook and, of course, winning the game. So, not possible, also. We also can try to see if there is a stalemate, but here, of course, we just take the bishop without any compensation. And this is a clear win for black with two bishops and a rook. I don't see how white can continue. Well, maybe try something like this, but I don't know what to do here. Maybe pinning the rook again. I don't know. So this is not possible. And also other moves for the stalemate also don't work because even if I have the bishops controlling these diagonals, there are a lot of room for the king to move, and so not a good idea. After this, we see, okay, we need to protect the bishop, and d6 is not available because the bishop is simply controlling the square. So after, well, let's say some seconds, I see that, or a minute, or okay, I give you a minute. I see that this is the only move, so obvious move. Now black to play. Of course, we don't want to take the bishop because the rook takes again, and this is a draw. Although there are positions where the rook and bishop can win against the rook, this is not the situation. And if you keep the rook and the king more in the center, well, this is more or less an easy win. You just need to be an easy draw. You just need to be careful. So taking is not a possibility. Of course, other moves possible. Let me say just, for example, if I give a check, the king just moves to the side, and the bishop is not in danger because if I take, in the end, there will also not be enough material to win. So here, the only logical move, I think it's very fast to realize that this is what black will do, pinning the rook. Now, pinning the rook is interesting, but the threat of taking and allowing the king to take back, uh, I think it's good enough to discourage white to try some fancy moves. So first, take the bishop. Take the bishop because now, if the bishop takes the rook, I take back, and then I get rook versus bishop, which again in this position it's an easy draw. Again, we need to be careful and so on. Blah 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 blah. But if you know that we need to keep the king in the center and use the bishop to protect it, it's a draw. Uh, because if we do something like try to play smart, like for example, giving a check, which the rook can take the bishop because our rook is also checking, it's a double check. Well, the king moves away, and now if I take the bishop, well, I will have to face uncomfortable things like now the rook is attacked by two pieces and only one defending. There's no way to block the access to the rook, so the king moves, and this is a loss. So without further delays, here I think it's obvious that we need to take, and now we are waiting for black to play. Of course, the biggest threats in this position is all around the rook coming, attacking the rook, because the rook is already pinned, so black needs to be more or less fast in doing that. But moves like, for example, a direct attack by f5 doesn't work because the bishop blocks. So the position is consolidated now. There's no way to take because again we have the rook versus bishop endgame, which is a draw. So here, not possible. Let's see what else we have to try. Of course, don't forget that when the bishop gets away, there's a discover check. So either I block or I move the king. And moving the king is also an option, but let's say, for example, what happens if and of course, don't forget that taking the rook is not enough for a win. So let's see what happens if the king moves here. Well, if it moves here, it makes life simple. We already know that the key squares to control are f5 and rook c2 are the basic threats I need to control fast. So bringing the bishop over here is enough because controls both squares. And if the rook tries to pin the bishop with the threat of taking the rook and next taking the bishop, well, white can save itself because now the rook is hanging, of course, but when the bishop takes, I also take the other bishop, the other rook, and obvious a draw. So the king needs to move, but as we saw, king h4 allows this easy defensive plan. Let's see if we have other options. And the other good option is king g4. Why? Because if white keeps the same planning about controlling, now that's different because we are pinning the bishop and there's no free attack on the rook, which would lead to a defeat. So this basically nullifies the option of bishop e4. So the bishop needs to find a different solution. Checking, well, seems like a good move, but the king just moves to the side. Don't forget, we are now threatening to play rook c2, and again, threatening to win the rook for free. So the bishop needs to come something like bishop e6. The idea is to block the rook if the rook goes to c2. But now, and pay attention because this is not as simple as it looks, but we need to maneuver with the rook until we get tempo for attacking the rook. And the best technique, it's just one suggestion from me. There are other ways, but to win that tempo, we attack the bishop. Of course, now we are also threatening check, and then the king needs to move up to keep protecting the rook and check, and we get the rook. So only good move, or at least at my eyes, is to play without giving up the game already, to play bishop d5, and now we need to wait. And this is the smart move. We are already in an open file, so we simply play a waiting move. Not an innocent waiting move, because now we are threatening check, and when the king keeps protecting the rook, we give another check. There's no more blocking because the king will be in the way, and when the king removes itself from there, I can simply take the rook, for example, with the bishop. Um, so now it's again the white bishop to move. Otherwise, it will be simple. If the king keeps trying to protect the rook, then we are going to face rook c1 check, and next move bishop takes the rook for free. So bishop tries to hide away, but now, as you can see, I have an open road to deliver the check and then attacking the king again and winning the rook in the behind. Okay, so this is more or less the technique to defeat bishop c8 check. We just approach the king and then we play along the e5. My suggestion. So here white has to find a better move, and this is the better move because again we are controlling the access to c2, and at first sight, oh, we are allowing the rook to come to f5. Well, let's see that first. What can we do here after this? Because it seems that, well, there's no defense. Yeah, there is one defense. There is to pin the rook. So as you can see, without this possibility, we just need to defend this one if we keep the bishop in the same diagonal. Uh, of course, without this move being possible, and this one just falls into this pretty defense, and there's no way the rook can force the game anymore because we simply move the king away. We are now hanging the rook, but at the same time counter-attacking the other rook, so not possible for black to progress with this. Black needs to find better ways, and uh, let's see, for example, what happens if I try the same thing when we play the bishop c8 check. Here it's different because I am allowing the king to move away, and the king can escape very easily, and from now on there's no way. The rook is being attacked again, but if I take, it's a draw again. So this just allows the king to move away. Without this possibility, we can also try to attack the bishop, but the bishop just moves, and yes, it seems like I am being pinned, but all right, I give I give up, and what are you going to do? Okay, it's a draw again. So here, the right and the most hard move to face is check. Now the king needs to move up. Of course, there's not many possibilities, and check again. And it seems like I am going to lose the rook. But if I take with the bishop, uh, well, white can simply pin the rook because, unfortunately for black, the rook is in the way. Uh, So after here, if I take with the rook, check, well, I am going to be surprised with losing the bishop. And so after I move, I lose the bishop, and again, I have a draw. Uh, let's come back just a bit. So rook f4 was one big possibility. At first sight, it looked like it was going to work, but unfortunately, in the end, black also loses the a7 bishop. Here, other possible move, a smart also approach is to try to move the king away from the pinning diagonal. So now again, I am threatening to attack on the f5, but simply I can bring the bishop to control the diagonal. As we saw before, we need to control these two squares. So simply bringing the bishop to d3, and now even if black tries to be smart here, we need to pay attention. I suggest you pause and try to find what can you do with the bishop, because if you play sloppy over here, we are almost drawing, but it's not yet done. The threat is to take the rook, then we take back, then take the bishop, so we need to be careful. And so we need to move the bishop, but if we move to places that we shouldn't, well, we are going to be faced with this, because now I am allowing the threat to go to c7, and of course now the bishop will try to protect, but then it will be pinned, and as you can see, the king moves away, and then I get this one, and easy win. So we need to be careful with the bishop. The same goes to other moves like this one. Well, this is pretty simple, and then we take the bishop. uh, what else can I show you? Maybe this one. This one may looks like the same thing as going to h7, but we simply attack the bishop one time, so the bishop is forced to move. And how can white defend the rook going to c1? That's not possible. And again, we are in the situation where, well, it seems like everything is controlled, but this check ends everything. Okay. So in this last challenge for white, we need to find also this move. This is the only way to protect our draw, because the same approach of then threatening to go to c6 can be defended simply with moving the king, attacking, okay, hanging the rook again, but taking the chance to attack the rook. Either way, we are going to have a draw. Here is bishop against bishop, and if the rook takes the bishop, then we are free with our rook. We can simply move it away, and then Just be careful. This is a draw. Rook and bishop against rook in this situation is a draw. Okay, this I think was a hard one, at least long. I don't know if you have found this far. Nevertheless, is a good exercise for deep calculation. I had trouble with this one also, so don't feel ashamed if you also have found difficulties over here. Hope you have enjoyed and see you in future studies. Bye bye.